German Shepherd, left chained in heavy rain. Without shelter, baby's next move, left everyone crying. What you're about to listen to will leave you in tears. A story of unbelievable courage, heartbreak, and what one small child did that changed everything. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The rain pounded against the windows like angry fists, each drop racing down the glass in zigzag patterns that fascinated 6-year-old Ethan. He pressed his small fingertips against the cold window, tracing the water's path, while thunder cracked overhead, splitting the dark afternoon sky. His breath fogged the glass as he leaned closer, squinting to see through the sheets of relentless rain that had turned their usually cheerful neighborhood into something from a gloomy storybook. "Ethan, honey, please stay away from the windows," his mother Sarah called from the kitchen. Her voice carried the weight of exhaustion, the kind that comes from working double shifts at the hospital and raising a child alone. "The storm's getting worse." Ethan didn't move. Something had caught his eye, a dark shape huddled against their back fence line, barely visible through the curtain of rain. He squinted harder, his nose almost touching the glass now. "Mom," he whispered, then louder, "Mom, I think there's something out there." Sarah appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Dark circles underlined her eyes, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled from the long day. She peered over his shoulder, following his pointed finger. "It's just the old tarp from the garden shed that blew away last week," she said, ruffling his hair. "Nothing to worry about, buddy. Now, come help me with dinner. Your mac and cheese isn't going to stir itself." Ethan nodded reluctantly, but as his mother returned to the kitchen, he lingered. The shape had moved. He was sure of it. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and for just a second, Ethan saw it clearly. Not a tarp, but an animal. A dog. A big one. Sarah's phone rang from the kitchen, and he heard her voice shift into what he called her grown-up tone, the one she used when talking to her boss or bill collectors. "Yes, I understand. No, I can't come in tonight. My son? Yes, I know the hospital is short-staffed." Ethan used the distraction to press his face harder against the glass. Another flash of lightning, and he saw it again. The dog was chained to their back fence, where it met the abandoned property behind them. It had no shelter, no protection from the driving rain. As Ethan watched, the animal lifted its head weakly, and even through the storm, he could have sworn their eyes met. "I promise I'll make it up next week," Sarah was saying, her voice strained with the effort of staying polite. "My childcare fell through, and..." The thunder crashed so loudly that Ethan jumped away from the window. When he looked back, the yard had fallen into darkness again, but he couldn't unsee what he'd glimpsed. The dog was soaked, its fur plastered to its body, and it wasn't moving much. Something twisted in Ethan's stomach, a feeling he'd had only once before, when he'd found a baby bird fallen from its nest last spring. Sarah hung up the phone with a deep sigh that seemed to come from somewhere beneath her feet. "Ethan, dinner's ready, and I need to talk to you about something important." He joined her at their small kitchen table, climbing onto his chair as she set down a steaming bowl of mac and cheese in front of him. Her own plate held only a small portion, and Ethan noticed, not for the first time, how she always gave him the bigger serving. "The hospital called," she began, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "They're really busy tonight because of the storm. Accidents and emergencies." She trailed off, her eyes darting to the window, where rain still lashed against the glass. "Mrs. Peterson from next door is going to come stay with you for a couple of hours. I have to go in." Ethan nodded, pushing his spoon through the cheesy pasta without eating. "Mom, there's really a dog out there, in our backyard. It's tied up and getting all wet." Sarah's forehead creased with concern. "Honey, are you sure? The Millers behind us moved out weeks ago. They didn't have a dog." "It's there," Ethan insisted, his voice rising. "It looked at me. It's all alone in the rain." Sarah checked her watch, her shoulders tense with the pressure of time. "Ethan, I can't deal with this right now. If there is a dog, and I'm not saying there is, we'll check in the morning when the storm passes. It's too dangerous to go out there now." "But it's too dangerous for the dog to stay out there," Ethan protested, his eyes wide with genuine distress. A sharp knock at the front door cut their conversation short. "That's Mrs. Peterson," Sarah said, relief evident in her voice. "Please be good for her, okay? I'll be back before you know it." She kissed the top of his head, the scent of hospital antiseptic still clinging to her hair. "And Ethan," she added firmly, "do not go outside. Promise me." Ethan looked down at his bowl, his fingers crossed under the table. "I promise," he mumbled, not meeting her eyes. Mrs. Peterson bustled in, all fake cheer and chattering about the storm. She was nice enough, but she smelled like old perfume and always pinched Ethan's cheeks too hard. Sarah gave her quick instructions, grabbed her raincoat and umbrella, and with one last worried glance at her son, disappeared into the stormy night. The moment the door closed behind her, Ethan slid from his chair and returned to the window. Mrs. Peterson was already settling into the living room armchair, turning on the TV to her favorite game show. "Just finishing my dinner," Ethan called out when she asked where he was. He stood on tiptoes, straining to see through the rain-soaked glass. The yard was dark, but another flash of lightning revealed the truth. The dog was still there, head now resting on its paws. It wasn't moving much. Something cold and determined settled in Ethan's chest. His mom had taught him that promises were important, but she'd also read him stories about heroes who did the right thing even when it was hard. And leaving an animal out in a storm like this couldn't be the right thing. He glanced at Mrs. Peterson, who was already dozing in front of the television, the remote clutched loosely in her hand. The storm would cover any noise he made. Moving quickly, Ethan tiptoed to the mudroom. He pulled on his yellow raincoat and matching boots, both still a little too big for him. Room to grow, his mom always said. His heart pounded as he eased open the back door, wincing at its soft creak. The rain hit him immediately, cold and shocking against his face. The wind nearly pushed him back inside, but he set his jaw and stepped into the deluge. The yard had transformed into a miniature swamp, mud sucking at his boots with each step. He pulled his hood tighter and pressed forward, using the brief flashes of lightning to guide his way toward the back fence. The rain soaked through his coat within seconds, and he shivered, thinking of how the dog must feel after hours in this storm. When he finally reached the fence line, Ethan stopped short. There, just as he'd seen from the window, was a German shepherd. The dog was larger than he'd expected, but painfully thin, its ribs visible even through its wet coat. A heavy chain connected a metal collar to a stake hammered into the ground, giving the animal barely enough room to stand. The dog raised its head weakly at Ethan's approach, amber eyes reflecting the distant house lights. "Hi," Ethan whispered, his voice nearly lost in the rain. "It's okay. I'm here to help you." The dog watched him, too exhausted or too frightened to move. Ethan inched closer, remembering what his grandfather had taught him about approaching unfamiliar animals. "You've got to respect them," Grandpa Mike had said during their visits to his small farm. "Move slow, talk soft, and let them know you mean no harm." Ethan extended his hand, palm down, fingers curled. "I'm not going to hurt you," he promised, rain streaming down his face. "I'm Ethan. What's your name?" The dog's collar had a small mud-cake tag. Carefully, Ethan wiped it clean with his thumb. "Max," he read aloud. "Your name is Max." At the sound of his name, the dog's tail moved. Just once, a tiny thump against the mud. Ethan smiled, encouraged by this small response. "You're a good boy, Max. You're such a good boy. Why would anyone leave you out here?" He examined the chain, following it to where it connected to the stake. The metal links were rusty and rough, the stake driven deep into the ground. There was no way he could pull it out with his bare hands. Ethan looked back at the house, considering his options. Mrs. Peterson was likely still asleep. He had time. "I'll be right back," he promised Max, whose eyes followed him, with a new alertness. "Don't go anywhere, okay?" He tried to laugh at his own joke, but it caught in his throat when he saw Max shiver violently, water pooling beneath his belly. Ethan splashed back to the house, leaving muddy boot prints on the kitchen floor as he searched through drawers. He needed something to break the chain or pull up the stake. In the junk drawer, he found a pair of pliers his mom used for home repairs. He wasn't sure they'd work, but they were better than nothing. He was about to head back outside when he spotted his wagon in the corner of the mudroom, the red one Grandpa Mike had given him for his birthday. An idea formed in his mind. Quickly, he grabbed the small fleece blanket from the couch, stuffed it under his raincoat, and picked up the wagon handle with his free hand. Mrs. Peterson snored softly from the armchair, oblivious to the rescue mission unfolding in her care. Ethan slipped back outside, pulling the wagon behind him. The storm seemed to have intensified, the wind howling between houses and rain falling in sheets that stung his face. He struggled forward, determined to reach Max. The German Shepherd hadn't moved, but his eyes brightened slightly at Ethan's return. "I brought help," Ethan told him, kneeling in the mud beside the dog. He pulled out the pliers and examined the chain, quickly realizing they were too small for the thick links. Frustration welled up inside him, threatening tears. He tugged experimentally at the stake, but it didn't budge. The blanket was getting soaked under his coat. Time was running out. Mrs. Peterson could wake up any minute, or the storm could get even worse. He had to try something else. Ethan studied the collar itself. The buckle was standard leather, fastened with a metal pin. With cold, trembling fingers, he worked at the buckle, his small hands slipping on the wet leather. Max whimpered once but didn't resist, as if understanding Ethan's intentions. "Almost got it," Ethan whispered, his tongue poking out in concentration. "Just one more." The collar suddenly gave way, sliding free from Max's neck to reveal raw, chafed skin underneath. Ethan gasped at the sight, anger flaring in his chest at whoever had done this. "You're free now," he told Max, running a gentle hand over the dog's wet head. "You can come with me?" But Max didn't move. He tried to stand, his legs wobbling dangerously before collapsing back into the mud. Ethan saw now what the rain had partially hidden. Max's back leg was injured, the fur matted with what might have been blood. The dog was too weak to walk. "It's okay," Ethan soothed, pulling the damp blanket from under his coat. "I brought my wagon. I can take you home." He spread the blanket beside Max, then, as gently as possible, coaxed and guided the large dog onto the fabric. Max was heavy, but fear had given Ethan unexpected strength. With much effort, he managed to slide the blanket with Max on it into the wagon. The journey back to the house was arduous. The wagon wheels kept sticking in the mud, forcing Ethan to pull with all his might. Rain pelted them mercilessly, and twice he nearly lost his grip on the handle. But each time he looked back at Max, who watched him with trusting eyes, he found renewed determination. Finally, they reached the back porch. Getting Max up the 3 steps would be impossible with the wagon. Ethan abandoned it and, with strength born of pure adrenaline, dragged the blanket with Max on it up the steps, one at a time. At the door, he paused, suddenly uncertain. Where could he hide a full-grown German shepherd? His mom would be furious if she found a strange dog in the house, especially one as dirty and possibly injured as Max. And Mrs. Peterson would definitely call his mom if she discovered them. The garage. The thought came to him suddenly. The attached garage had a side door that his mom rarely locked. It was dry, relatively warm, and Mrs. Peterson wouldn't hear them from there. Changing direction, Ethan lugged Max around the side of the house to the garage door. To his relief, it opened easily. Inside was dark and cluttered, but dry and sheltered from the howling wind. He pulled Max into a corner between boxes of Christmas decorations and his old baby furniture, creating a makeshift den. "You'll be safe here," Ethan promised, kneeling beside the exhausted dog. In the dim light filtering from the small garage window, he could see Max more clearly now. The German Shepherd was severely undernourished, his once powerful frame reduced to sharp angles and protruding bones. His coat was dull, and now that it was beginning to dry, patches were visibly missing. The injury on his back leg looked like a deep cut, possibly infected. Max's eyes, though, they were alert and intelligent, watching Ethan's every move. When the boy gently stroked his head, Max leaned into the touch with surprising trust. "You need food and water," Ethan murmured, "and we gotta fix your leg. I'll be right back." He slipped back into the house, careful to wipe his muddy boots. Mrs. Peterson was still asleep, the game show now replaced by a news program showing footage of flooded streets and downed power lines. The reporter was saying something about the worst storm in a decade, but Ethan wasn't listening. He moved silently to the kitchen, gathering supplies, a bowl of water, leftover chicken from last night's dinner, and the first aid kit his mom kept in the bathroom cabinet. Arms full, he made his way back to the garage, where Max waited patiently. The dog's eyes lit up at the smell of food, and he struggled to sit up. Ethan quickly set down the water bowl, which Max drank from eagerly, water spilling over the sides in his desperation to quench his thirst. "Slow down," Ethan whispered, gently stroking Max's neck. "There's plenty more." When Max had finished drinking, Ethan offered him small pieces of chicken, which disappeared instantly. The boy was careful not to give too much at once, remembering a story his mother had told about helping a starving patient who got sick from eating too quickly. With Max focused on the food, Ethan carefully examined the injured leg. The cut was deep and angry-looking, with dirt embedded in the wound. Following the pictures in the first aid kit instructions, he cleaned it as best he could with antiseptic wipes, wincing when Max flinched in pain. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm trying to help." By the time he'd bandaged the leg with gauze and medical tape, a messy job, but the best he could manage, Max had finished the chicken and was watching him with what Ethan could have sworn was gratitude. The dog's tail thumped weakly against the blanket. Ethan sat back on his heels, suddenly realizing how soaked and muddy he was. If Mrs. Peterson saw him like this, she'd know he'd been outside. He needed to change clothes and somehow clean up the trail of mud he'd left behind. "I have to go back inside for a little while," he told Max, who laid his head on his paws with a soft whine. "But I'll come check on you again, I promise. You're safe now." As if understanding, Max closed his eyes, his breathing evening out as exhaustion overtook him. Ethan watched for a moment, his heart swelling with a strange mix of pride and worry. He had saved Max from the storm, but what would happen tomorrow? What would his mom say? And where had Max come from in the first place? These questions swirled in his mind as he crept back into the house, carefully removing his wet clothes in the laundry room and hiding them under other dirty laundry. He found a mop and quickly erased the worst of the mud tracks, then changed into clean pajamas. By the time Mrs. Peterson stirred from her nap, Ethan was sitting innocently at the kitchen table, drawing pictures as if he'd been there all along. "Have a nice nap," he asked when she blinked at him sleepily. "Oh my, I must have dozed off," she said, adjusting her glasses. "The storm's really something, isn't it? Have you been good?" Ethan nodded, hiding his drawings of Max under a blank sheet of paper. "Just waiting for Mom to come home," he said with his most innocent smile. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but in the garage, a German shepherd slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, safe from the rain and with a full stomach. And in the kitchen, a little boy with mud still under his fingernails plotted his next move, unaware that his simple act of kindness had set in motion events that would uncover dangerous secrets and change lives forever. Ethan woke before sunrise, his dreams filled with amber eyes and falling rain. He slipped out of bed, his heart racing with worry about Max. Had the dog survived the night? Was he in pain? Was he hungry? These questions pushed Ethan to tiptoe down the hallway, past his mother's bedroom, where she slept deeply after her emergency night shift. The house was quiet, the storm finally passed, leaving behind a fresh, clean smell that drifted through the partially open windows. Ethan carefully opened the door to the garage, wincing at its soft creak. "Max," he whispered into the dim space. "Are you okay, boy?" A soft thump answered him, Max's tail hitting the concrete floor. Ethan found the light switch and flipped it on. There in the corner, exactly where he'd left him, lay Max on the now dry blanket. The German shepherd lifted his head, eyes bright with recognition, and something that looked remarkably like joy. "You remember me?" Ethan said with a grin, kneeling beside the dog. He'd been worried that Max might be afraid, or even aggressive after a night alone in a strange place, but the dog merely watched him with trusting eyes, his tail continuing its gentle rhythm against the floor. Ethan checked the bandage on Max's leg. It had stayed in place, though the gauze was stained with dried blood and something yellowish that worried him. The wound looked serious, more serious than his limited first aid skills could handle. Max needed a real doctor, a vet, but Ethan knew his mom couldn't afford vet bills right now. She'd been worried about paying the electric bill just last week. "I'm going to get you some breakfast," Ethan promised, gently stroking Max's head. The dog leaned into his touch, a soft whimper escaping him. "Does your leg hurt a lot? I'll try to find something to make it better." In the kitchen, Ethan filled a clean bowl with water and looked through the refrigerator for something Max could eat. There wasn't much. His mom had been planning to go grocery shopping today. He found some sliced turkey, a bit of leftover rice, and half a can of green beans. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. As he gathered these items, Ethan heard his mother's alarm clock go off, followed by the sound of her shuffling around her bedroom. He had to hurry. Balancing everything carefully, he returned to the garage and set the food down for Max, who ate with the same desperate hunger as the night before. "Ethan?" His mother's voice called from inside the house. "Are you up already, honey?" "Just getting some cereal," he called back, giving Max one last pat. "I'll come back soon," he whispered to the dog. "Don't make any noise, okay?" Max seemed to understand, settling back onto the blanket with a soft sigh. Ethan slipped back into the house just as his mother entered the kitchen, her hair still tousled from sleep, dark circles under her eyes. "You're up early for a Saturday," Sarah said, stifling a yawn as she started the coffee maker. "Everything okay?" Ethan nodded, busying himself with pouring cereal to hide his nervousness. "Just hungry. How was work?" Sarah sighed, leaning against the counter while waiting for her coffee to brew. "Busy. 3 car accidents because of the storm, and a tree fell on someone's house over on Maple Street." She rubbed her eyes. "I'm sorry I had to leave you with Mrs. Peterson again. Was she okay?" "She fell asleep watching game shows," Ethan said with a shrug, which made his mother laugh. "That sounds about right." Sarah poured her coffee, adding the last splash of milk from the carton. "We need to go grocery shopping today. The fridge is looking pretty empty." Ethan's heart sank. If they went shopping, he wouldn't be able to check on Max for hours. And the dog needed medicine for his leg, which was definitely infected. He needed to come up with a plan, fast. "Mom," he began carefully, stirring his cereal without eating it. "Remember how I told you I saw a dog in our backyard yesterday? During the storm?" Sarah nodded absently, scrolling through her phone. "Oh, right. Let me look outside and see if it's still there. Poor thing probably belongs to someone who's looking for it." Before Ethan could stop her, Sarah walked to the back door and peered out at the yard, which was a muddy mess after the storm. "I don't see any dog, honey. Maybe it found its way home." "Maybe," Ethan agreed, relief washing over him. He wouldn't have to explain why the dog was in their garage, at least not yet. "Mom, do we know anyone who's a veterinarian? Like, someone who might look at an animal for free?" Sarah turned to him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Why do you ask?" Ethan shrugged, trying to appear casual. "Just wondering, in case we ever find a hurt animal or something." "Well," Sarah said slowly, "there's Dr. Wilson at the clinic where we took your class hamster that time, but his services definitely aren't free." She paused, studying her son's face. "Ethan, what's going on? Did you find an injured animal?" Ethan hesitated, torn between keeping his secret and getting help for Max. Before he could decide, a sharp bark sounded from the garage, just one, but clear enough that Sarah's head swiveled toward the sound. "What was that?" she asked, setting down her coffee cup. "Probably just the neighbor's dog," Ethan said quickly, but his mother was already moving toward the garage door. He followed, his stomach knotting with anxiety. "Mom, wait!" Sarah opened the door and flipped on the light. Max, who had managed to stand on 3 legs, balanced awkwardly on the blanket. He didn't growl or bark again, but watched them with alert, intelligent eyes. "Ethan." His mother's voice was dangerously calm. "Why is there a German Shepherd in our garage?" Ethan stepped around her, moving to Max's side and placing a protective hand on the dog's head. "This is Max. He was tied up in our backyard during the storm last night. He was all alone and getting soaked, and his leg is hurt, and I couldn't just leave him there, Mom. I couldn't." Sarah's expression cycled through shock, anger, and concern in rapid succession. "You went outside during that storm, after I specifically told you not to? Ethan, you could have been seriously hurt. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking Max could die out there," Ethan shot back, tears springing to his eyes. "He was chained up with no shelter and he couldn't even move, and his leg was bleeding and—" Okay, Sarah interrupted, taking a deep breath. She knelt to examine Max from a safe distance. "You said he was chained up? In our yard?" Ethan nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "At the back fence line, where our yard meets the empty house behind us. Someone put him there and just left him." Sarah's expression darkened. "That's beyond cruel," she muttered, her nurse's training obviously kicking in as she assessed Max's condition. "He's severely malnourished, and that leg definitely needs medical attention." She sighed heavily. "Ethan, we can't keep him. We need to call animal control." "No!" Ethan cried, throwing his arms around Max's neck. The dog whimpered but leaned into the boy's embrace. "They'll put him in a cage, or worse. Please, Mom, we have to help him." Sarah ran a hand through her hair, her exhaustion evident. "Honey, I understand you want to help, But we can barely afford to feed ourselves right now. Vet bills, dog food, vaccinations. It's just not possible. What about Grandpa Mike's friend? Ethan asked suddenly, remembering something. The one who came to the farm sometimes to help the animals? Wasn't he a vet? Sarah blinked in surprise. Mr. Carson? I haven't spoken to him in years, not since your grandfather passed away. She chewed her lip, considering. He did retire a while back, but he might be willing to at least look at the dog's leg and tell us what to do. Hope surged in Ethan's chest. Can we call him, please? I promise I'll help take care of Max. I'll use my allowance for dog food and everything. His mother looked at him for a long moment, then at Max, whose pleading eyes seemed almost as effective as her son's. Fine, she relented with a sigh. I'll try to get hold of Mr. Carson. But, Ethan, I'm not promising anything beyond getting this dog the medical help he needs. Then we need to find his owners or a proper shelter. His owners left him chained in a storm, Ethan pointed out, his voice hardening with a maturity beyond his years. They don't deserve to get him back. Sarah didn't argue with this logic. Instead, she took out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Let me see if I still have his number. And Ethan? Her voice softened. What you did was dangerous and against the rules. But it was also very brave and kind. Your grandpa would be proud. Ethan beamed at this rare praise, scratching behind Max's ears as his mother made the call. To his delight, she actually reached Mr. Carson, and after a brief explanation, he agreed to come over and examine Max that afternoon. He says to keep the wound clean and make sure the dog stays hydrated, Sarah reported after hanging up. He'll bring some antibiotics and proper bandages. Apparently, he still keeps a small practice for friends and family. Thank you, Mom, Ethan said, throwing his arms around her waist. Don't thank me yet, she warned, though her arms came around to hug him back. We still need to figure out what happens to Max after he's treated. For the rest of the morning, Ethan stayed with Max in the garage, reading books aloud to the German Shepherd and telling him stories about school and his friends and Grandpa Mike's farm. Max listened with apparent interest, his eyes following Ethan's every movement, his tail thumping whenever the boy used an excited voice for a character in his story. At one point, Ethan tried to coax Max to stand again, curious about whether the dog could walk with his injured leg. Max made a valiant effort, wobbling to his feet and taking 2 shaky steps before collapsing with a yelp of pain. It's okay, Ethan soothed, stroking Max's side as the dog panted from exertion. You don't have to walk yet. Mr. Carson will make your leg better. Shortly after lunch, which Ethan shared with Max, giving the dog his sandwich and eating only an apple himself, the doorbell rang. Mr. Carson was a tall, thin man with a weathered face and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He carried an old leather medical bag that looked like something from an antique store. Well now, he said, after Sarah had introduced him to Ethan, let's see this rescue dog of yours. In the garage, Mr. Carson knelt beside Max with a gentleness that immediately put both the dog and Ethan at ease. Hello there, fella, he murmured, letting Max sniff his hand before running expert fingers along the dog's body, checking for injuries beyond the obvious leg wound. He was chained up? Mr. Carson asked, his voice tight with controlled anger as he examined the raw marks around Max's neck where the collar had rubbed the fur away. Ethan nodded. With a really heavy chain. I couldn't break it, so I had to take off his collar instead. Mr. Carson hummed thoughtfully, turning his attention to the bandaged leg. He carefully removed Ethan's amateur dressing, revealing the angry wound beneath. This is a deep laceration, he said, more to Sarah than to Ethan. And yes, it's infected. He'll need antibiotics and proper cleaning. Might need stitches too, though I'm reluctant to do that if the infection is too advanced. He reached into his bag and pulled out various medical supplies, working with the efficiency of someone who had treated countless animals over decades of practice. Max whimpered occasionally, but remained surprisingly still, as if understanding that this man was trying to help him. The good news, Mr. Carson said as he cleaned the wound with antiseptic, is that this isn't as bad as it could be. With proper treatment, it should heal well. The bad news is that this dog has been neglected for quite some time. He's about 20 pounds underweight, and these marks on his neck and body suggest long-term abuse. Sarah made a small, distressed sound. Who would do that to an animal? Mr. Carson's face hardened. Someone who doesn't deserve to call themselves human, he muttered. But there's something else that's bothering me about this dog. He gently ran his hand along Max's side, pressing in certain spots and watching the dog's reaction. There's something under his skin here. Feels like some kind of small implant, not a standard microchip. Those are usually between the shoulder blades. This is more like... He frowned, hesitating. Like what? Ethan asked, his imagination conjuring up all sorts of possibilities, from alien tracking devices to secret spy equipment. Like a custom tracking device, Mr. Carson finished, his voice grave. I've seen similar implants in research animals and occasionally in high-value livestock, but never in a pet dog. Sarah and Ethan exchanged confused glances. Why would someone put a tracker in Max? Ethan asked. Mr. Carson shook his head. I don't know, but coupled with the signs of abuse and the fact that he was chained up in your yard. He looked directly at Sarah. I think you should consider calling the police. This might not be just animal cruelty. There could be something more sinister going on. A chill ran down Ethan's spine at these words. He moved closer to Max, as if to protect him from invisible threats. We're not giving him back, he stated firmly, no matter what. Mr. Carson smiled at the boy's determination. Let's focus on getting him healthy first. I'll leave you with antibiotics and proper bandages. He needs to rest that leg completely for at least a week. Keep the wound clean and dry, change the bandage daily, and feed him small, frequent meals. His stomach won't be able to handle large amounts of food after being starved. As Mr. Carson packed up his supplies, Sarah followed him to the front door, their voices dropping to whispers that Ethan couldn't quite hear. He stayed with Max, who seemed exhausted by the examination and medical treatment. You're going to be okay, Ethan promised, stroking the dog's head. You're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you ever again. Max's eyes, heavy with tiredness, fixed on Ethan's face with such trust that it made the boy's heart swell. The German Shepherd's tail thumped once, twice, then was still as he drifted into sleep, the new medication beginning to ease his pain. Later, when Sarah returned to the garage, her expression was troubled. Mr. Carson thinks we should keep Max inside the house, she said. The garage isn't comfortable enough for a recovering dog, and... She hesitated. He's concerned about whoever put Max in our yard. They might come looking for him. Ethan brightened at the first part of this news. Max could come inside, but the second part sent another chill through him. Why would they come looking for him if they left him chained up in the rain? Sarah knelt to be at eye level with her son. Honey, we don't know the full story yet. Mr. Carson thinks the tracking device in Max might be important. He's going to make some calls to former colleagues, see if they can shed any light on it. In the meantime, we need to be careful. Can we move him inside now? Ethan asked, eager to get Max settled in a more comfortable spot. Sarah nodded. Yes, but he can't walk on that leg. We'll need to carry him. Together they managed to lift Max onto the blanket and used it as a makeshift stretcher to carefully transport him into the living room. They created a cozy bed for him, with pillows and blankets in the corner, where he could see both the front door and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. As they settled him in his new spot, Ethan couldn't help but notice how right it felt to have Max in their home, as if a missing piece had finally been found. The German Shepherd seemed to feel it too, his eyes moving between Ethan and Sarah with something like contentment despite his physical discomfort. What did Mr. Carson say at the door? Ethan asked as they sat on the floor beside Max's new bed. I heard you whispering. Sarah sighed, absently stroking Max's fur. He thinks we should be cautious. The tracking device concerns him. It's not something typically used for pets. He's going to do some research and get back to us. In the meantime, he suggested we keep the doors locked and not tell too many people about Max. Like it's a secret mission. Ethan whispered, his eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear. Something like that, Sarah agreed with a small smile. A mission to keep Max safe until we figure out where he came from and why someone would abandon him like that. Little did they know that across town, two men were staring at a small device displaying a blinking dot that had remained stationary since the previous night. A dot that led directly to their house. Do you think Ethan's mom should call the police now, or wait for more information? Tell us what you would do if you were in their shoes. Night had fallen by the time Ethan finally agreed to go to bed. He'd spent the day beside Max, talking to him, reading to him, and making sure he took the antibiotics Mr. Carson had left, hidden in small pieces of turkey. The German Shepherd was sleeping more comfortably now, the medicine easing his pain and fighting the infection in his leg. 5 more minutes? Ethan pleaded when Sarah pointed to the clock, showing it was well past his bedtime. You said that 20 minutes ago, she replied with a tired smile. Max will still be here in the morning. He needs rest to heal, and so do you. Reluctantly, Ethan kissed the top of Max's head and whispered goodnight before heading to his room. Sarah double-checked all the locks on the doors and windows, something she rarely did before tonight, and joined her son to tuck him in. Mom? Ethan asked, as she pulled his blanket up to his chin. Do you think the people who hurt Max will try to take him back? Sarah hesitated, not wanting to frighten him, but unwilling to lie. I don't know, honey, but we're going to keep him safe. Mr. Carson is making some calls tomorrow, and we'll figure out what to do next. I won't let anyone take him, Ethan said firmly, his small face set with determination that made him look so much like his father that Sarah's breath caught. He's ours now. Sarah smoothed his hair back from his forehead. We'll see. Now, get some sleep. I love you. Love you too, Ethan murmured, his eyes already closing. Sarah checked on Max one more time before retreating to her own bedroom. The German Shepherd lifted his head briefly, watching her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. Despite her initial reluctance, she had to admit she was already growing attached to the gentle dog. You're quite the mystery, aren't you? She whispered, giving his head a gentle pat. What happened to you, Max? And why were you in our yard? Max simply watched her, offering no answers but somehow making her feel safer just by his presence. Sarah finally headed to bed, exhaustion from her night shift and the day's events pulling her quickly into sleep. It was just past midnight when a noise woke her, a low, warning growl coming from the living room. Sarah sat up, instantly alert. That was Max. Something was wrong. Silently, she slipped out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat she kept in her closet, a habit she'd developed as a single mother living alone with her son. She crept down the hallway, pausing to check that Ethan was still asleep in his bed. In the living room, Max was on his feet despite his injured leg, his posture rigid, ears forward, staring intently at the back door. The growl rumbling from his chest was quiet but unmistakable. A warning. Sarah froze, straining to hear what had alarmed the dog. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a faint scraping sound at the back door. Someone was trying to get in. Her heart hammering in her chest, Sarah backed toward the hallway, planning to grab Ethan and lock themselves in the bathroom while she called 911. But before she could move, Max let out a single, sharp bark, louder than she'd thought him capable of in his weakened state. The scraping stopped immediately. Through the thin curtain covering the back door's window, Sarah saw a flashlight beam sweep across her yard, then disappear. Whoever had been there was retreating, scared off by Max's warning. Sarah stood frozen, the bat clutched in her hands, until the sound of a car engine starting and then fading into the distance confirmed that the immediate danger had passed. Only then did she rush to check all the locks again and peek through the curtains to make sure no one remained in the yard. When she returned to the living room, Max had collapsed back onto his bed, his energy spent, but his eyes remained alert, watching the door. Good boy, Sarah whispered, kneeling beside him. Her hands trembled as she stroked his fur. You protected us. Max leaned into her touch, his tail thumping weakly against the blanket. In that moment, any lingering doubt Sarah had about keeping the German Shepherd vanished. This dog had just prevented what could have been a break-in, or worse. She grabbed her phone and dialed Mr. Carson's number, despite the late hour. This couldn't wait until morning. Hello? His voice was groggy with sleep. Mr. Carson, it's Sarah Mitchell. I'm sorry to call so late, but someone just tried to break into our house. I think they were looking for Max. The retired vet was instantly alert. Are you and Ethan okay? Yes, we're fine. Max scared them off with a bark. They didn't get in. Listen to me carefully, Mr. Carson said, his voice low and urgent. Pack some essentials for you and Ethan. Grab Max and come to my house. It's not safe for you there right now. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. You think they'll come back? I don't know, but I wouldn't take that chance. I made some calls today about that tracking device. What I found out, it's concerning. I'd rather tell you in person. My address is 1472 Pine Creek Road. It's about 20 minutes from you. We'll be there as soon as we can, Sarah promised, already mentally listing what they would need to bring. After hanging up, she quickly packed a bag with clothes for herself and Ethan, grabbed their toothbrushes and Max's medication, then gently woke her son. Ethan, honey, wake up. We need to go." He blinked sleepily, confused by the urgency in her voice. "Go where?" "To Mr. Carson's house. Max isn't feeling well, and Mr. Carson wants to check on him." It wasn't entirely a lie, but she saw no reason to frighten Ethan with the truth about the attempted break-in. "Now, it's nighttime," Ethan pointed out, rubbing his eyes. "Yes, now. It's important. Can you help me get Max to the car?" Mention of the dog was enough to get Ethan moving. Despite his grogginess, he helped Sarah carefully lift Max onto the blanket again, and together they carried him to their old sedan parked in the driveway. Sarah kept glancing nervously over her shoulder as they settled Max in the back seat with Ethan. The street was quiet and dark, most houses showing only the faint blue glow of nightlights or television screens. Nothing seemed out of place, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. They drove through the sleeping town, Sarah taking a few random turns to make sure they weren't being followed. Ethan had fallen back asleep, his head resting against Max's side in the back seat. The German Shepherd remained awake, his eyes reflecting the occasional streetlight as they passed beneath it. Mr. Carson was waiting for them on his porch when they pulled up to his modest house on the outskirts of town. The property was surrounded by tall pines, isolated enough to provide privacy, but close enough to neighbors to not feel completely vulnerable. "Bring him inside quickly," the older man said, helping them carry Max from the car. Ethan, now fully awake again, grabbed their bag and followed. The interior of Mr. Carson's home was warm and cluttered in a comfortable way, with bookshelves overflowing with veterinary texts and nature guides, and walls covered in photographs of animals, both domestic and wild. He led them to a spacious living room, where a fire crackled in a stone fireplace. "Make yourselves comfortable," he said, gesturing to a worn but clean sofa. "I'll make some tea." Once they were settled, with Max on a thick rug near the fire, and Ethan curled up in an armchair, fighting to stay awake, Mr. Carson returned with mugs of steaming tea and a serious expression. "I've been making calls all day," he began, keeping his voice low to avoid alarming Ethan, who was drifting in and out of sleep. "The tracking device in Max isn't standard. It's military grade, the kind used for covert operations or high-security scenarios. It transmits not just location, but vital signs as well." Sarah's hands tightened around her mug. "Military? Why would a dog have military-grade tracking?" Mr. Carson leaned forward, his voice dropping even lower. "Because Max isn't just any dog. I showed his picture to a former colleague who works with service animals. She recognized him immediately." He glanced at Max, who was watching them intently, as if understanding they were discussing him. "His full name is Maximus, and he's a specially trained K-9 unit that worked with the local police department's drug task force. Went missing about 3 months ago during a raid that went wrong." Sarah gasped, looking at the German Shepherd with new understanding. "He's a police dog." "Was," Mr. Carson corrected grimly. "His handler, Officer Daniel Reynolds, was killed during that raid. The official report said that both the officer and the dog were caught in an explosion at a suspected drug processing facility. Reynolds' body was recovered, but Max supposedly died in the fire, except ... He gestured toward the very much alive dog lying by the fireplace. "He survived," Sarah whispered, the implications dawning on her. "But why wouldn't the police department be looking for him? And why was he chained up in our yard?" "That's the troubling part," Mr. Carson said, rubbing his beard thoughtfully. "According to my contact, the case involving Reynolds' death was closed rather quickly. Too quickly, some thought. There were rumors that the raid wasn't just about drugs, that they found something else there, something more valuable, and Max was with Reynolds the whole time." "You think Max saw what happened?" Sarah asked incredulously. "But he's a dog. He can't testify." "No, but he might have evidence on him. That tracking device isn't standard police issue. It's something else entirely. And there's this." Mr. Carson reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag containing what looked like fragments of black plastic. "I found these embedded in the wound on his leg. They're pieces of a micro-storage device, like a tiny hard drive or memory card. Someone surgically implanted it under his skin, and it looks like he was injured when someone tried to remove it." Sarah's mind reeled with the implications. "You think Officer Reynolds hid evidence on his own dog? Why would he do that?" "Insurance, perhaps," Mr. Carson suggested. "If he suspected something wasn't right about the operation, he might have wanted backup evidence. The police department thought Max died in the fire, so no one would think to look for any evidence on him." But someone knew, Sarah said, glancing at her sleeping son and lowering her voice further. Someone knew Max survived and has been keeping him prisoner, trying to get whatever is hidden on that device. Mr. Carson nodded grimly. And when they couldn't extract it safely, they abandoned him in your yard during the storm, probably hoping he'd die of exposure or his injuries. When that didn't happen, they tracked him to your house. Sarah felt sick. What had started as her son's simple act of kindness in rescuing a dog had pulled them into something dangerous, possibly a police corruption case or worse. What do we do now? Go to the police? What if they're involved? I have a friend, Mr. Carson said after a moment's thought. He's with the state police, not local. I trust him. We can call him in the morning, tell him everything. In the meantime, you'll be safe here. My property isn't registered under my name. It's under my late wife's maiden name. If they're tracking Max, they won't find this address easily. Sarah nodded, exhaustion and fear battling within her. She looked over at Ethan, now fully asleep in the armchair, his face peaceful and unaware of the danger surrounding them. Then her gaze moved to Max, who despite his injuries had tried to protect them. There was no going back now. They were involved whether they wanted to be or not. Get some rest, Mr. Carson urged, rising to his feet. I'll keep watch for a while. The guest bedroom is down the hall on the right. There's a bed big enough for you and Ethan. Thank you, Sarah said with genuine gratitude, for everything. I don't know what we would have done without your help. You were right to call me, he assured her. Whatever's going on here, it's bigger than just a lost dog, but we'll figure it out. He paused, looking at Max with admiration. He's a brave one, standing guard despite his condition. Officer Reynolds trained him well. Sarah gently woke Ethan and guided him to the guest bedroom, where he immediately fell back asleep on the soft bed. She was about to join him when she remembered Max's medication in their bag. Returning to the living room, she found Mr. Carson sitting in an armchair by the window, a shotgun resting across his lap. Just a precaution, he said, noting her wide-eyed look at the weapon. I don't expect trouble tonight, but it's always better to be prepared. Sarah nodded, kneeling beside Max to give him his antibiotics. The German Shepherd took the medicine willingly from her hand, then gently licked her fingers afterward, as if thanking her. You're a hero, aren't you? She murmured, stroking his head. Just like Ethan said, you tried to protect your handler, and now you're protecting us. Max's amber eyes held hers for a long moment, something almost human in their depths. Sarah had never been one to anthropomorphize animals, but in that moment, she could have sworn Max understood exactly what she was saying, and that he was silently promising to keep them safe. Back in the bedroom, she curled around Ethan's sleeping form, one ear attuned to any unusual sounds from outside. Despite her fear and the strangeness of their situation, there was comfort in knowing that both Mr. Carson and Max were standing guard. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Sarah woke disoriented before remembering where they were and why. Ethan was already up, his side of the bed empty. Panic flared briefly until she heard his laughter from somewhere in the house. Following the sound, she found him in the kitchen with Mr. Carson, who was showing him how to flip pancakes on an old cast-iron skillet. Max lay nearby on a fresh blanket, looking more alert than he had the previous day, his tail thumping happily as he watched the cooking process with evident interest. Mom, Ethan exclaimed when he saw her. Mr. Carson's teaching me how to make breakfast, and he says Max is feeling better today. Sarah managed a smile, grateful that her son remained blissfully unaware of the real reason for their hasty departure from home. That's wonderful, honey. Did you take your medicine, Max? She asked, directing the question to the dog as if he might answer. Max's tail wagged faster, which she took as affirmation. I called my friend at the state police, Mr. Carson said quietly as Ethan focused on carefully flipping another pancake. Detective James Harrington. He's coming by around noon. Said he'd been hearing rumors about that raid for months, but never had enough evidence to reopen the investigation. Sarah nodded, accepting a cup of coffee from him with grateful hands. Should Ethan be here for that conversation? Mr. Carson considered this. Probably best if he isn't. I have a neighbor a few houses down with grandkids about his age. I could arrange for him to visit while we talk to Harrington. That might be best, Sarah agreed, watching her son chatting happily to Max about the pancakes. I don't want him scared. He's been through enough already. The morning passed quietly, with Ethan spending most of it by Max's side, reading from one of Mr. Carson's many books about animals. The German Shepherd seemed to be gaining strength by the hour, the combination of rest, medication, proper food, and safety doing wonders for his recovery. Around 11:30, Mr. Carson's neighbor, Mrs. Patel, arrived to pick up Ethan for what had been described to him as a play date with her grandchildren. Initially reluctant to leave Max, Ethan was convinced when Mr. Carson promised to call immediately if the dog needed him. "You be good for Mrs. Patel," Sarah instructed, hugging her son tightly. "And stay close to her house, okay? No wandering off." "I will," Ethan promised, though his eyes kept darting back to Max. "Take care of him, Mom." "I will," she echoed, feeling a lump in her throat at her son's attachment to the dog, an attachment she now shared. Shortly after Ethan left, a plain black sedan pulled into Mr. Carson's driveway. A tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair emerged, his bearing unmistakably that of law enforcement, even though he wore civilian clothes. "That's Harrington," Mr. Carson confirmed, watching through the window. "Good man, thorough. If anyone can get to the bottom of this, it's him." As Detective Harrington approached the house, Max suddenly stood up, his ears perked forward, his posture alert but not threatening. When Mr. Carson opened the door, the German Shepherd limped forward a few steps, his tail beginning to wag hesitantly. The detective stopped in his tracks, his face registering shock as he looked at Max. "My God," he breathed. "It really is him, Reynolds' dog." He knelt slowly, extending a hand. "Hey there, Max. Remember me? We worked together a few times." Max's tail wagged faster, and he moved closer to sniff Harrington's hand. Whatever he scented seemed to satisfy him, because he gave the detective's fingers a quick lick before turning and limping back to his place by the fireplace. "He knows you," Sarah observed as Harrington entered the house, still looking stunned. "I worked with Reynolds on a few joint operations," the detective explained, removing his jacket. "Max was one of the best trained canines in the state. Everyone thought he died in that explosion." He shook his head in disbelief. "Where did you find him?" For the next half hour, Sarah and Mr. Carson recounted everything. How Ethan had discovered Max chained in their yard during the storm, the tracking device, the attempted break-in, and the fragments of what appeared to be a storage device embedded in Max's leg wound. Harrington listened intently, taking notes and occasionally asking clarifying questions. When they finished, he sat back, his expression grave. "This confirms what I've suspected for months," he said finally. "That raid wasn't properly sanctioned. Reynolds was onto something big, corruption within the department, possibly reaching all the way up to the chief. He'd approached me about his concerns a week before the raid, said he had evidence but wanted to collect more before going official." He looked at Max with newfound understanding. "So, that's where he hid it. Clever. No one would think to check his dog." "Can you extract the remaining pieces of the device?" Mr. Carson asked, nodding toward Max's bandaged leg. Harrington shook his head. "Not safely, and not without proper equipment. But I know someone who can. The problem is getting Max to them without alerting whoever is tracking him." He paused, thinking. "We need to remove that tracker first." "Can you do that here?" Sarah asked, concerned about putting Max through another procedure so soon. "It should be relatively simple now that we know exactly where it is," Mr. Carson offered. "I have basic surgical supplies. With Detective Harrington's help, I could remove it this afternoon." "And then what?" Sarah pressed, feeling the weight of their situation bearing down on her. "Those men who tried to break in, they'll come back, won't they?" Harrington's expression hardened. "Not if I have anything to say about it. Once we have that evidence, I'm going straight to the federal authorities. This goes beyond local jurisdiction." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of tires on gravel outside made them all freeze. Max was instantly alert, a low growl building in his throat as he stared at the front door. "Are you expecting anyone else?" Harrington asked quietly, his hand moving instinctively toward where his gun would normally be holstered. Mr. Carson shook his head, moving cautiously to peek through the curtains. His face paled. "Two men, black SUV. They don't look like they're here to sell magazine subscriptions." Harrington's expression turned grim as he pulled a small handgun from an ankle holster. "They must have tracked us here somehow." He turned to Sarah, his voice low and urgent. "Is there a back way out?" She felt her blood run cold. The men who had tried to break into her house had found them, and Ethan was just a few houses away, completely unaware of the danger. What if they found him too? Think we know who these mystery men are? Share your theories. And what do you think is on that memory device Max is carrying? Kitchen door leads to a back path through the woods, Mr. Carson said immediately, already moving. It'll take you to the main road about half a mile east. Sarah's thoughts raced to Ethan. My son? I'll get him, Mr. Carson promised. Mrs. Patel's house is in the opposite direction from where these men are coming. You take Max with Detective Harrington. Go now. There was no time to argue. Sarah quickly gathered Max's medication while Harrington scooped up the German shepherd, who was surprisingly light due to his malnourished state. The detective winced under the burden, but headed for the kitchen without complaint. Be careful, Sarah whispered to Mr. Carson, squeezing his arm as she passed. The old vet nodded grimly. You too. There's a diner called Ruby's at the highway intersection. Meet us there when you can. Then they were out the back door and moving through the dense pine trees behind Mr. Carson's property. Max remained remarkably quiet in Harrington's arms, as if sensing the need for stealth. From the front of the house came the sound of car doors slamming, followed by loud knocking. They're not even trying to be subtle, Harrington muttered, adjusting his grip on Max as they navigated through underbrush. Which means they're confident. That worries me. Sarah stumbled over a root, barely catching herself on a tree trunk. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her ears. Just days ago, her biggest worry had been making ends meet and keeping Ethan happy, despite their tight budget. Now she was running through the woods from men who might be corrupt police officers, alongside a dog carrying evidence of a murder. The forest path was barely visible, more of a game trail than a proper walkway. Pine needles cushioned their footsteps, but branches snagged at their clothes and scratched their faces as they hurried forward. Despite his injury, Max remained alert, his ears constantly moving, listening for pursuit. After what felt like hours but was probably only 15 minutes, the trees began to thin, and Sarah could make out the shimmer of asphalt ahead, the main road Mr. Carson had mentioned. Wait, Harrington said suddenly, setting Max down gently on a fallen log. We need a plan. We can't just stand on the roadside hoping for a ride. Sarah caught her breath, looking back the way they had come. No sign of pursuit yet, but that didn't mean they weren't being followed. Mr. Carson said to meet at Ruby's diner. That's at least 3 miles from here, Harrington pointed out, and Max can't walk that far. As if to prove the detective wrong, Max struggled to his feet, determination evident in every line of his body. But Harrington was right. The dog was in no condition to travel far on foot. I could call a taxi, Sarah suggested, pulling out her phone. But what if they're monitoring the phone lines, or tracking my cell? Harrington frowned thoughtfully. They might be, but we need transportation. He scanned the road ahead, then pointed to a small, weather-beaten building about a quarter-mile down. There, looks like some kind of store. Maybe they have a phone we can use, or someone might give us a ride. With no better options, they continued toward the building, which turned out to be a small general store with a gas pump out front. A rusty pickup truck was parked beside the entrance, its bed loaded with firewood. Inside, a bell jingled as they entered. The store was cluttered but clean, with shelves stocked with basic necessities and local products. Behind the counter, an elderly woman looked up from her crossword puzzle, eyebrows rising at the sight of Sarah, Harrington, and a clearly injured German shepherd. Morning, she said cautiously. Something I can help you folks with? Harrington stepped forward, his manner shifting subtly to project calm authority. Ma'am, I'm Detective James Harrington with the state police. He showed her his badge. We have an emergency situation and need transportation to Ruby's diner at the highway intersection. It's a police matter. The woman studied his badge, then looked at Max, her expression softening. That's Charlie Reynolds' dog, isn't it? The one that went missing after he died? Harrington blinked in surprise. You knew Officer Reynolds? Everyone around here knew Charlie, she said with a sad smile. Good man. Stopped by here every week on his way to visit his mother in Green Oaks. Always had that beautiful dog with him. She shook her head. Terrible what happened. Never believed the official story for a minute. Sarah and Harrington exchanged glances. What do you mean? Sarah asked carefully. The woman snorted. Charlie was too smart to get caught in some explosion, and he'd been worried about something the last few times I saw him. Said people in the department were taking payoffs, looking the other way on certain cases. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Said he had proof, too. He did, Harrington confirmed, his voice equally low. And that's why we need to get Max somewhere safe. The men who killed Reynolds are after him now." The woman didn't hesitate. She reached under the counter and pulled out a set of keys. "Take my truck. It's not much to look at, but it runs good. I'll call my nephew to come get me when my shift ends." "We can't ask you to," Sarah began, but the woman cut her off with a wave. "You're not asking, I'm offering. Charlie Reynolds saved my grandson from a drug addiction 3 years ago. Got him into a program instead of jail. If his dog needs help, then by God, I'm helping." She pressed the keys into Harrington's hand. "There's a blanket in the truck bed. Wrap the dog in it so he's not so visible." Overwhelmed by this unexpected kindness, Sarah could only murmur her thanks. The woman nodded briskly, then added, "There's a back exit through the storeroom, less visible from the road." They followed her directions, Harrington once again carrying Max, who seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. The pickup truck was old but clean, with a full tank of gas according to the gauge. Sarah spread the blanket on the back seat, and they carefully settled Max on it. "Ruby's is about 20 minutes from here," the store owner told them as they prepared to leave. "But if you're trying to avoid being followed, there's a longer route through Millfield that's less traveled." She quickly gave them directions, then stepped back. "Good luck, and when you see whoever did this to Charlie, give him one for me." Harrington took the wheel, and they pulled away from the store, taking the less obvious route as suggested. Sarah twisted in her seat to check on Max, who was watching the passing scenery with alert eyes despite his obvious fatigue. "So, Officer Reynolds was investigating corruption in his own department," she said after a few minutes of silence. "And he stored the evidence on Max." Harrington nodded grimly, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror. "Daniel, Charlie to his friends, came to me about 3 months ago. Said he'd stumbled onto something big during a routine drug bust. Money changing hands between his captain and a known trafficker. He started digging, found more connections. But he knew if he came forward without solid proof, it would be his word against theirs. So he collected evidence," Sarah surmised, "and hid it on Max for safekeeping." "Exactly. The storage device in Max's leg probably contains photos, recordings, account numbers, all the proof needed to take down a significant portion of the department." Harrington's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "But someone must have suspected him. The raid where he supposedly died, it was a setup. They needed to eliminate him and recover whatever evidence he had." "But they didn't find it," Sarah said, looking back at Max again. The German shepherd met her gaze steadily, as if confirming the story. "Because it was on Max, and Max escaped." "Somehow, yes, Max must have gotten away during the confusion. But he was injured, probably in the explosion they set off to cover up Reynolds' murder." Harrington shook his head in admiration. "They've been hunting him ever since. 3 months on the run, injured, hungry, but he kept that evidence safe." "Until Ethan found him," Sarah whispered, a chill running through her at how close her son had come to these dangerous people. "Do you think they chained him in our yard deliberately? Did they know about us?" Harrington considered this. "I doubt it. More likely they caught him, realized the storage device was damaged and couldn't be safely removed without specialized equipment, and decided to get rid of him. The storm was convenient. Exposure would have killed him if Ethan hadn't found him." They drove in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The rural landscape rolled by outside the windows, fields, scattered houses, the occasional small farm. It seemed impossible that such peaceful scenery could hide such dangerous secrets. Sarah's phone buzzed with an incoming text, making her jump. It was from Mr. Carson. "Got E, heading to meeting place. All clear so far." Relief washed over her. Ethan was safe. "Mr. Carson has my son," she told Harrington. "They're on their way to Ruby's." The detective nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Good. We'll regroup there, then figure out our next move. I have a contact at the FBI field office in the city. Once we extract the evidence from Max, we can take it directly to them, bypass the local authorities completely." As they approached a crossroads, Harrington suddenly tensed. "Black SUV, 2 o'clock, coming up fast." Sarah twisted in her seat to look. Sure enough, a dark vehicle was speeding toward the intersection they were about to cross. "Is it them?" "Can't be sure, but I'm not taking chances." Harrington accelerated, pushing the old truck faster than it probably had gone in years. They shot across the intersection just as the SUV reached it. Through the rear window, Sarah saw it skid to a stop, then turned to follow them. Definitely them, Harrington confirmed grimly, checking the mirror. They must have found a way to keep tracking Max despite taking a different route. In the back seat, Max struggled to his feet, balancing awkwardly on 3 legs as he looked out the rear window, a low growl building in his throat. The device in his side, Sarah realized. It's still active. That's how they found us at Mr. Carson's, and that's how they're following us now. Harrington swore under his breath. We need to lose them long enough to remove that tracker, but first, we need to make sure Ethan and Mr. Carson are safe. He pressed the accelerator harder, the truck's engine protesting as they sped along the country road. Call Carson. Tell him to change the meeting place. We can't lead these men to Ruby's. Sarah quickly sent a text. Change of plans. Being followed. Meet at the old mill instead. The old mill was a local landmark she remembered from childhood trips with her father. Abandoned but still standing, about 5 miles past Ruby's diner. The reply came quickly. Understood. Be careful. The SUV was gaining on them, its more powerful engine easily closing the distance. The truck rattled and shook as Harrington pushed it to its limits, taking turns too fast and bouncing over potholes. There's a bridge up ahead, he said, his voice tight with concentration. Narrow, 1 lane. If we can cross it first, I might be able to block it somehow, buy us some time. The old wooden bridge came into view, spanning a rocky creek bed that was mostly dry this time of year. True to Harrington's description, it was barely wide enough for 1 vehicle, with weathered guardrails that had seen better days. Hang on, the detective warned as they approached at dangerous speed. Sarah braced herself against the dashboard while reaching back to steady Max, who had lain down again but was watching everything with alert eyes. They hit the bridge with a bone-jarring thud, the truck's tires thundering over the wooden planks. About halfway across, Harrington suddenly spun the wheel, bringing the vehicle to a screeching halt perpendicular to the bridge, effectively blocking the entire span. Out! He ordered, already opening his door. Grab Max! We go on foot from here. Sarah didn't question him. She threw open her door and helped maneuver Max out of the back seat. The German Shepherd was trying his best to move on his own, his injured leg barely touching the ground as he hobbled alongside them. Harrington reached back into the truck and did something under the dashboard. Then he grabbed a small emergency kit from the glove compartment and joined them. This way, he directed, leading them toward a path that descended steeply to the creek bed below. They had just reached the bottom when the SUV screeched to a halt at the bridge entrance. 2 men jumped out, one tall and thin, the other stocky with a shaved head. Both wore dark jackets despite the warm day, likely concealing weapons. Down! Harrington hissed, pulling Sarah and Max behind a large boulder at the creek's edge. They huddled there, breathing hard, as footsteps sounded on the bridge above. They're on foot, the stocky man called out, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet countryside. Probably went down to the creek. You follow them, I'll move the truck and bring the SUV around. They can't have gone far, the thin man replied. The dog's injured, and the tracker shows they're still close. Sarah felt a surge of panic. As long as the tracking device remained in Max, they would never escape. Harrington seemed to reach the same conclusion. He opened the emergency kit he'd grabbed, revealing a small first aid set, a flashlight, and, to Sarah's shock, a pocket knife. We need to get that tracker out, he whispered, nodding toward Max. Right now, it's our only chance. Here? Sarah whispered back incredulously. Without anesthesia or proper tools, Max, as if understanding the situation, shifted closer to them and lay down, exposing his side where the small lump was visible beneath his fur. His amber eyes met Sarah's with what seemed like resignation, or perhaps determination. We don't have a choice, Harrington said grimly, already using an alcohol wipe to clean the blade of the knife. They'll be on us in minutes. If we don't do this now, we'll lead them straight to Ethan. The mention of her son decided it for Sarah. What do you need me to do? Hold him still. Keep his head turned away from what I'm doing, and be ready to run the moment I have the tracker out. Above them, they could hear the thin man descending the slope toward the creek bed, loose rocks tumbling down ahead of him. Harrington worked quickly, applying more alcohol to the area on Max's side where the tracker was implanted. I'm sorry, buddy, he murmured to the dog. This is going to hurt, but it's going to save your life. Max remained eerily still as Harrington made a small, precise incision. The German Shepherd flinched but made no sound. His eyes locked on Sarah's face as she held him and whispered soothing words. Blood welled from the cut, but less than she had feared. With careful fingers, Harrington probed the wound, his face intense with concentration. "Got it," he whispered after an agonizing moment. He withdrew what looked like a small metal capsule about the size of a pill, covered in blood. "Leave it here," Sarah suggested quickly. "Under the rock. They'll think we're still here while we escape." Harrington nodded approvingly. Smart. He tucked the tracker under the edge of the boulder, then quickly applied a gauze pad to Max's new wound, securing it with medical tape from the kit. "It's not ideal, but it'll have to do until we can get him proper care." The sound of sliding rocks and muttered curses grew closer. The thin man was nearly at the creek bed. "Time to go," Harrington whispered, helping Max to his feet. The dog seemed remarkably steady despite the makeshift surgery, standing alertly on 3 legs. They moved silently along the creek bed, staying low and using the large rocks for cover. The thin man had reached the bottom now and was moving toward the boulder where they had hidden, and where the tracker still signaled their presence. "Lost visual on the targets," they heard him say, presumably into a radio or phone. "But the tracker shows they're right here somewhere, closing in now." They used his distraction to put more distance between them, following the dry creek bed for about 100 yards before finding another path leading up the opposite bank. It was steep and slippery, but desperation gave them strength. Even Max managed to scramble up with minimal assistance, though Sarah could see fresh blood seeping through the gauze on his side. At the top, they found themselves in a dense stand of trees that offered good cover. Through gaps in the foliage, they could see the bridge where the stocky man was now attempting to move the truck. On the creek bed below, the thin man was circling the boulder in confusion, checking his tracking device repeatedly. "We need to keep moving," Harrington urged quietly. "The old mill is still about 4 miles from here. Can Max make it that far?" The German shepherd was panting heavily, but his eyes remained bright and determined. He took a few steps to demonstrate his willingness, though Sarah could see it cost him considerable effort. "I can carry him part of the way," she offered. Max might be underweight, but he was still a full-grown German shepherd, not an easy burden, but the alternative was leaving him behind, which wasn't an option. "We'll take turns," Harrington decided. "For now, let's use the tree cover and move parallel to the road. We can't risk being spotted." They set off at the best pace they could manage, Harrington in the lead, Sarah beside Max to offer support when his strength flagged. Behind them, faintly came shouts of frustration as their pursuers realized the tracker was no longer attached to their quarry. The journey was grueling. The wooded terrain was uneven, with fallen logs and thorny underbrush to navigate. Max pushed on valiantly, but after about a mile, his energy began to wane. Sarah and Harrington took turns carrying him then, struggling under his weight, but determined not to leave him behind. The sun climbed higher, beating down through the tree canopy and adding heat to their already exhausting trek. Sarah's arms and legs burned with fatigue, and sweat soaked her clothes. But the thought of Ethan waiting for her, potentially in danger if she failed, kept her moving forward. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the trees thinned and they could see the old mill in the distance, a weathered wooden structure standing beside a long, dry mill pond. In the gravel lot beside it sat Mr. Carson's station wagon. "They made it!" Sarah breathed in relief, new energy flowing through her at the sight. Harrington held up a cautionary hand. "Wait, let's make sure it's not a trap. Stay here with Max while I check it out." The detective moved forward alone, using the scattered trees for cover as he approached the mill. Sarah watched anxiously, her arm around Max's neck, both for comfort and to keep him from following. The German shepherd was trembling with exhaustion, but his eyes remained fixed on the mill, as alert as ever. After a tense minute, Harrington emerged from behind a tree and waved them forward. "It's clear. They're inside." Sarah helped Max along for the final stretch, his steps slow but determined. As they approached the mill's weathered door, it swung open to reveal Ethan's small face, his eyes wide with worry, but lighting up at the sight of them. "Mom! Max!" he cried, rushing forward to meet them. He threw his arms around the dog's neck, oblivious to the blood-soaked bandage on Max's side. "I was so scared you wouldn't come." "I promised I would, didn't I?" Sarah said, fighting back tears as she embraced her son. Over his head, she met Mr. Carson's concerned gaze in the doorway. "Are you both okay? Were you followed?" The older man shook his head. "No sign of trouble. I took a very roundabout way here, just to be sure. He moved forward to examine Max, his frown deepening at the makeshift bandage. What happened? Emergency surgery, Harrington explained tersely. Had to remove the tracking device. They were right on our heels. Mr. Carson nodded grimly. Let's get inside. I brought my medical bag. Can take a proper look at him there. The interior of the old mill was dusty but intact, with ancient machinery still standing in silent testimony to its working days. Mr. Carson had set up a small area with blankets spread on the floor and a cooler of water and sandwiches beside it. Didn't know how long we'd need to stay, he explained, helping Max settle onto the blankets. Brought supplies just in case. While the retired vet tended to Max's wounds, both the original leg injury and the new incision from removing the tracker, Harrington stood by the window, keeping watch on the road. Ethan stayed close to Max, stroking his head and offering encouraging words as Mr. Carson worked. The good news, the older man announced after a thorough examination, is that both wounds look clean, no signs of infection spreading. The bad news is that he's exhausted and has lost blood. He needs rest, fluids, and proper medical care as soon as possible. And we still need to extract the storage device fragments from his original wound, Harrington added, not turning from his vigil at the window. My FBI contact has a forensic team that can handle it, but we need to get Max to them first. Sarah watched her son whispering to Max, their foreheads almost touching, the bond between them already unbreakable, despite knowing each other only a few days. How far is the FBI field office? About 2 hours from here, in the city, Harrington replied. But we can't just drive straight there. Those men will be watching all the main roads. Mr. Carson cleared his throat. I have a friend with a small private plane. Flies out of a local airstrip about 20 miles from here. If we can get there, he could take you directly to the city, bypass the roads entirely. Harrington turned, interest lighting his face. That could work. Can you contact him? Already did, Mr. Carson said with a slight smile. Called while waiting for you to arrive. He's standing by. Said he owes me a favor after I saved his prize hunting dog last year. A plan began to form. They would rest briefly at the mill, allowing Max to regain some strength. Then they would take Mr. Carson's station wagon to the airstrip, where his friend would fly Harrington, Sarah, Ethan, and Max to the city. From there, the FBI could take over, extracting the evidence and, hopefully, bringing down the corrupt officers who had murdered Daniel Reynolds and hunted his loyal partner. As they discussed the details, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how completely her life had changed in just a few days. All because her son had refused to leave a dog suffering in the rain. Speaking of her son, Ethan had been unusually quiet during their planning. She looked over to find him fast asleep, curled against Max's side, one arm draped protectively over the German shepherd. Max, despite his own exhaustion and pain, lay awake, his amber eyes watchful, his body positioned to shield the boy. He's been guarding Ethan ever since they met, Sarah said softly, watching the pair. Even injured and hunted, his first instinct is to protect. That's what Reynolds trained him for, Harrington said, his voice equally quiet. Protection, loyalty, but this, he gestured to the sleeping boy and vigilant dog, this goes beyond training. This is choice. As they settled in to rest before the next leg of their journey, Max's eyes met Sarah's across the dusty mill floor. In them, she saw not just intelligence, but something deeper. A promise, made without words, but no less binding for its silence. Whatever happened next, Max would protect her son, just as Ethan had protected him. What do you think will happen when they get to the FBI? Will the corrupt officers try one last desperate move to stop them from revealing the truth? They rested at the mill for just under an hour, enough time for Max to regain some strength and for all of them to eat a quick meal from the supplies Mr. Carson had brought. Ethan stayed close to Max the entire time, as if afraid the German shepherd might disappear if he looked away even for a moment. You saved him twice now, Sarah said softly to her son, as she watched him gently offer Max water from a plastic bowl, first from the storm, and then by bringing him into our lives so we could help him. Ethan looked up at her with solemn eyes that seemed older than his years. He saved us too, Mom. The bad men would have broken into our house if Max hadn't barked and scared them away. She couldn't argue with that. This extraordinary dog, despite his injuries and trauma, had protected them from the very beginning, just as he had tried to protect his original handler, Officer Reynolds. Harrington, who had been keeping watch at the window, suddenly tensed. "Car coming! Everyone down!" They dropped to the floor, Sarah pulling Ethan close while Mr. Carson quickly dimmed the battery-powered lantern he'd brought. Max raised his head alertly, but remained silent, his training evident in his discipline. Through the dusty window, they watched as a police cruiser slowly drove past the mill, its spotlight sweeping across the abandoned building. For a heart-stopping moment, the light lingered on Mr. Carson's station wagon, but then continued on, the cruiser eventually disappearing around a bend in the road. "Local police?" Harrington muttered, his expression grim, which means either they're actively helping in the search, or our friends in the black SUV have reported a stolen vehicle and missing persons, Mr. Carson finished. "Either way, we need to move. They'll be back with reinforcements once they report the car." Moving quickly, they gathered their few belongings. Max struggled to his feet without prompting, determined despite his injuries. When Ethan tried to help him, the German Shepherd gently nudged the boy's hand away, as if to say he could manage on his own. "He's got his pride," Harrington observed with a small smile, just like his handler did. They piled into Mr. Carson's station wagon, Max and Ethan in the back seat, Harrington riding shotgun with his gun ready, and Mr. Carson driving. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the countryside as they pulled away from the mill. "We'll take back roads to the airstrip," Mr. Carson explained, carefully navigating the gravel path that led away from the mill in the opposite direction from where the police cruiser had gone. "It'll take longer, but we're less likely to be spotted." The journey was tense, everyone acutely aware that discovery now would mean the end of their chances to expose the truth. Even Ethan seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, remaining unusually quiet in the back seat, one arm draped protectively over Max. The back roads twisted through farmland and patches of forest, occasionally passing isolated houses where lights were just beginning to come on against the gathering dusk. Twice they had to pull off the road and wait in tense silence as vehicles passed by. Once another police cruiser, and once a familiar black SUV that made Sarah's blood run cold. "They're casting a wide net," Harrington observed grimly after the SUV had passed. "Probably have every corrupt officer in the county looking for us." "How many do you think there are?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harrington's face was hard in the fading light. "Based on what Reynolds told me before he died, at least a third of the department is involved. The chief, several captains, and a number of patrol officers. They've been taking payoffs from drug traffickers for years, looking the other way on shipments, even providing security for some operations. And Reynolds had proof," Mr. Carson added, carefully pulling back onto the road once the SUV was out of sight. "Enough to bring down the entire operation," Harrington confirmed. "Names, dates, bank accounts, probably video evidence too. If we can get that storage device to the FBI intact, a lot of badges are going to be turned in, and a lot of prison sentences handed out." The implications were staggering. No wonder these men were so desperate to find Max. It wasn't just about covering up one officer's murder anymore. It was about protecting an entire criminal enterprise that had infiltrated local law enforcement. As night fully fell, they finally approached the small airstrip Mr. Carson had mentioned. It was little more than a narrow paved runway with a couple of small hangars and a modest control building set among fields well away from the nearest town. A single light illuminated the entrance, where a weather-beaten sign read, "Pine Ridge Airfield, Private." "My friend should be waiting in Hangar 2, Mr. Carson said, turning off his headlights as they approached and driving the last 100 yards in darkness. "Let's hope he hasn't been delayed." The airstrip appeared deserted, which was both reassuring and worrying. Had Mr. Carson's friend gotten cold feet? Or worse, had he been intercepted by the corrupt officers? They parked behind one of the hangars, out of sight from the main road. "Wait here," Mr. Carson instructed, cutting the engine. "Let me check things out first." "I'm coming with you," Harrington said firmly, checking his weapon. "No offense, but if there's trouble, you'll need backup." Mr. Carson nodded in acceptance, and the two men slipped out of the car, disappearing into the shadows around the hangar. Sarah and Ethan waited anxiously in the back seat with Max, who had positioned himself protectively between them and the door, his ears constantly moving as he listened for any threat. "Mom," Ethan whispered after a few minutes of tense silence, "are the bad guys going to find us?" Sarah pulled him close, wishing she could shield him from all of this. Detective Harrington and Mr. Carson won't let that happen, and neither will Max. At the sound of his name, the German Shepherd turned his head, amber eyes reflecting the faint moonlight that filtered through the car windows. Despite everything he'd been through, there was still strength in those eyes, and unwavering loyalty. A soft tap on the window made them both jump. Mr. Carson's face appeared, his expression relieved. "All clear. Frank's waiting with the plane. Let's go." They hurried across the tarmac to the second hangar, where a small twin-engine plane sat with its door open and a stocky, silver-haired man in a pilot's jacket standing beside it. "This must be your emergency cargo," the pilot, Frank, said as they approached, eyeing Max with professional interest. "Handsome fellow, military-trained by the look of him." "Police K-9," Harrington corrected, reaching out to shake the man's hand. "And he's carrying evidence that could put away a lot of dirty cops. That's why we need your help." Frank nodded solemnly. "Tom explained the basics. I don't need details, but I'll get you to the city safely. Weather's good, and we should have a smooth flight." He glanced at Ethan, his weathered face softening. "First time flying, young man?" Ethan nodded, his earlier fear temporarily forgotten in the excitement of seeing a real airplane up close. "Is it scary?" Frank chuckled. "Smoother than your mom's car on a bumpy road. You'll like it. And your dog friend there can sit right beside you." As they prepared to board, Mr. Carson pulled Sarah aside. "I think I should stay behind," he said quietly. "Draw them off if they come looking. Make them think you went in a different direction." "That's too dangerous," Sarah protested. "They've already seen you with us. They know you're involved." "All the more reason for me to lead them away from you," the older man insisted. "Besides, someone needs to let the store owner know her truck is parked at the creek bridge. I owe her that much." Before Sarah could argue further, distant headlights appeared on the access road leading to the airstrip. Multiple vehicles moving fast. "They found us," Harrington said sharply, already helping Ethan and Max into the plane. "We need to go, now." Frank was already in the cockpit, engines starting with a roar. Mr. Carson gave Sarah a quick hug, then stepped back. "Go, I'll create a diversion, and Sarah—" He paused, his eyes serious. "What Ethan did, saving Max, it was the right thing. No matter what happens, remember that." With that, he sprinted back toward his station wagon, clearly intending to draw the approaching vehicles away from the airstrip. Sarah climbed into the plane with a last worried glance in his direction, then helped Harrington secure the door. "Buckle up tight," Frank called from the cockpit as the plane began to taxi. Might be a bit of a bumpy takeoff. Through the small windows, Sarah could see 3 vehicles now, 2 police cruisers and the black SUV, racing onto the airstrip, their headlights cutting bright swaths through the darkness. Mr. Carson's station wagon shot across their path, honking and flashing its lights, then sped off down a side road. As hoped, 2 of the vehicles peeled off to follow him, but the black SUV continued toward the runway, where their plane was now picking up speed. "They're not falling for it," Harrington muttered, watching tensely as the SUV accelerated, trying to intercept them before they could take off. In the back seat, Ethan clutched Max tightly, the German Shepherd unusually tolerant of the squeezing embrace as the boy watched the chase with wide, frightened eyes. The plane gathered speed, the end of the runway approaching rapidly. The SUV was gaining, its headlights growing larger in the windows. For a horrible moment, Sarah thought they wouldn't make it, that the SUV would cut them off or, worse, crash into them during takeoff. Then the plane's nose lifted, and they were airborne, the wheels leaving the tarmac just as the SUV screeched to a halt beneath them. Through the window, Sarah caught a glimpse of the thin man from the creek standing outside the vehicle, his face contorted with rage as he watched their escape. And then they were climbing into the night sky, the airstrip falling away beneath them, the lights of pursuing vehicles becoming tiny pinpricks before disappearing altogether. "We made it," Sarah breathed, sagging against her seat in relief. "Not yet," Harrington cautioned, though he too looked relieved. "We still need to get Max to the FBI and extract that evidence, but we've cleared the first hurdle." The flight to the city took just under an hour, the small plane humming efficiently through the clear night sky. Ethan, despite his earlier excitement, fell asleep against Max, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with him. The German Shepherd remained awake and alert, his body forming a protective barrier between the sleeping boy and the door, his eyes occasionally meeting Sarah's with what seemed like shared understanding. As they approached the city, its lights spreading out beneath them like a glittering carpet, Frank spoke over his shoulder. "I've radioed ahead to a private airfield where we can land discreetly. Your FBI contact said he'll meet us there." Harrington nodded his thanks, then turned to Sarah. "Once we land, things will move quickly. The FBI will want to take Max to their labs immediately to extract the storage device fragments. They'll also want statements from all of us." "Will they catch the men who were chasing us?" Sarah asked, thinking of Mr. Carson and hoping he had escaped his pursuers. "They'll certainly try," Harrington assured her. "With the evidence from Max, they'll have probable cause to move against the entire corrupt network. It won't just be those two men. It'll be everyone involved, right up to the chief if necessary." The plane descended smoothly toward a small airfield on the outskirts of the city, where Sarah could see several dark vehicles waiting. As they touched down and taxied to a stop, figures emerged from the vehicles, men and women in the unmistakable suits and stance of federal agents. "Detective Harrington?" a tall woman asked as they disembarked, showing her FBI credentials. "I'm Special Agent Diaz. We've been briefed on the situation." Her eyes moved to Max, who was limping down the steps with Ethan's help. "Is this our key witness?" "This is Max," Harrington confirmed, "and he's carrying evidence vital to your investigation. He needs medical attention first. He's been through a lot." Agent Diaz nodded, signaling to one of her colleagues. "We have a veterinary specialist waiting at our facility. He'll be well taken care of, I promise." She knelt to Max's level, showing a gentleness that contrasted with her professional demeanor. "Hello, Max. We've heard a lot about you. Officer Reynolds would be proud." At the mention of his handler's name, Max's ears perked up, and his tail gave a single, solemn wag. Something passed between the dog and the agent, a recognition of shared purpose that needed no words. "And this must be the young hero who saved him," Agent Diaz continued, smiling at Ethan. "You did a very brave thing, young man." Ethan, still groggy from sleep, pressed closer to Max. "He needs medicine for his leg," he said seriously, "and his side where they took out the tracker, and he likes turkey better than chicken." Agent Diaz's smile widened. "We'll make sure he gets everything he needs." She straightened, addressing Sarah and Harrington. "We have vehicles waiting to take you to our field office. Mrs. Mitchell, we've arranged accommodation for you and your son while we process your statements." Everything moved quickly after that. They were ushered into separate vehicles, Max going with veterinary specialists in a specially equipped van, while Sarah and Ethan rode with Agent Diaz and Harrington with another agent. At the FBI field office, a modern building of glass and steel in the heart of the city, they were separated for debriefing. Sarah worried about Ethan being questioned alone, but a child psychologist was brought in to ensure he felt safe and understood what was happening. Max was taken to a laboratory where the remaining fragments of the storage device could be safely extracted from his leg wound. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of statements, questions, and waiting. Sarah told her story multiple times, to different agents with different specialties, each focusing on different aspects of what had happened. Through it all, her primary concern remained Ethan and Max, whether they were safe, comfortable, and not too frightened by these strange surroundings. Finally, as dawn broke over the city, Agent Diaz gathered them in a comfortable conference room where coffee, juice, and pastries had been provided. Ethan was bleary-eyed, but perked up at the sight of chocolate donuts. Harrington looked exhausted, but satisfied, the tension he'd carried since their first meeting finally easing from his shoulders. "I have updates," Agent Diaz announced, taking a seat across from them. "First, the good news. We successfully extracted the remaining fragments of the storage device from Max's leg. Our tech team has been working through the night to recover the data, and they've found exactly what we hoped for: extensive documentation of corruption within the Green Creek Police Department, including video recordings, financial records, and Officer Reynolds' own testimony." "So it was all there," Sarah breathed, relief washing over her. Max hadn't suffered in vain. Reynolds' death wouldn't go unpunished. "All there and more," Agent Diaz confirmed. "Reynolds was thorough. He documented everything: names, dates, locations. It goes beyond what we suspected. This wasn't just a few corrupt officers taking bribes. It was an organized operation with the chief himself at the top, providing protection for major drug trafficking through your county. The evidence is overwhelming and absolutely admissible in court." "What about the men who were chasing us?" Harrington asked. "And Mr. Carson, have you heard anything from him?" Agent Diaz's expression sobered. "That's the mixed part of the news. Based on the evidence from Max and your descriptions, we conducted raids early this morning, arresting the police chief, 2 captains, and 11 officers involved in the corruption ring. The 2 men who were directly pursuing you, identified as officers Jason Miller and Robert Taggart, were among those arrested. And Mr. Carson? Sarah pressed, noting the agent's hesitation. Mr. Carson was found at his home, injured but alive. It appears he led his pursuers on a long chase before doubling back to his property. They caught up with him there and attempted to force information from him. But our teams arrived in time to intervene. He's currently in the hospital under guard. Doctors expect a full recovery. Sarah closed her eyes briefly in relief. The kind veterinarian had risked so much to help them. The thought that he might have paid with his life had been weighing on her. "And what about Max?" Ethan asked, the question they had all been waiting for. "Is he okay? Can we see him?" Agent Diaz's face softened as she looked at the anxious boy. "Max is doing very well. The veterinary surgeon cleaned and properly treated both his wounds. He's on antibiotics and pain medication, and he's resting comfortably. And yes, you can see him. In fact," she glanced at her watch, "he should be finished with his last examination about now. Would you like me to take you to him?" Ethan was on his feet instantly, his fatigue forgotten. "Yes, please." They followed Agent Diaz through secure corridors to a quiet room that had been set up with comfortable bedding on the floor. There, lying on a thick blanket but alert and watching the door, was Max. His leg was properly bandaged, as was his side, and an IV line for antibiotics was attached to his foreleg, but his eyes brightened visibly at the sight of Ethan. "Max!" the boy cried, rushing forward to kneel beside the German shepherd. Max's tail thumped against the blanket, and he stretched his neck to lick Ethan's face, earning a giggle from the child. "Easy," warned a woman in a white coat who stood nearby, monitoring Max's IV. "He's still recovering." But Max seemed to have other ideas about his condition. With careful movements, he shifted himself until his head rested in Ethan's lap, his eyes closing contentedly as the boy gently stroked his ears. "He's been restless until now," the veterinarian observed with a smile. "I think he was waiting for you." Sarah watched the reunion with tears in her eyes, overwhelmed by everything they had been through and the bond that had formed between her son and this extraordinary dog. Harrington stood beside her, his own expression softened by the sight. "What happens to Max now?" Sarah asked quietly. "Will he go back to the police department?" Agent Diaz exchanged glances with Harrington before answering. "That's something we wanted to discuss with you. Max was officially listed as deceased after the warehouse explosion. The department has had a memorial to him and Officer Reynolds for months. Legally, he doesn't exist anymore." "So, what does that mean?" Sarah pressed, a small hope beginning to form in her heart. "It means," Harrington said gently, "that Max needs a home, a real one, with people who care about him, people who have already proven they would do anything to protect him." Sarah looked back at Ethan, who was now quietly reading from a book he'd found beside Max's bed, the German shepherd listening with apparent interest. "You mean, we think Max has chosen his new family," Agent Diaz confirmed with a smile. "That is, if you're willing to adopt him officially. There would be some paperwork, and he'll need ongoing care for his injuries, but we've secured funding to cover all his medical expenses as a thank you for his service." Tears spilled freely down Sarah's cheeks now. "Of course we'll take him. He's already part of our family." She watched as Max stretched up to lick away a smudge of chocolate from Ethan's chin, making the boy laugh. "I think he chose us from the moment Ethan found him in that storm." 1 month later, life had achieved a new normal for Sarah and Ethan. The trials of the corrupt police officers were ongoing, making headlines across the state. Mr. Carson had recovered fully and had become a regular visitor to their home, often bringing treats for Max and stories of his veterinary adventures for Ethan. Max, too, had healed remarkably well. His leg would always bear a slight stiffness, and the fur over his wounds had grown back a different color, small battle scars that told of his courage. But in all other ways, he had transformed into a happy, healthy family dog who adored his new people. On this particular evening, Sarah stood in the doorway of Ethan's bedroom, watching as her son read aloud from his favorite book. Max stretched out beside him on the bed, head resting on the boy's lap. The German shepherd's eyes were half closed in contentment, but his ears still moved occasionally, tracking sounds from outside, ever vigilant, even in moments of peace. "Time for lights out," Sarah announced softly after Ethan finished his chapter. 5 more minutes, Ethan pleaded, using the same tone he had that very first night with Max. Not tonight, buddy. School tomorrow. She moved forward to kiss his forehead and give Max an affectionate pat. Sweet dreams to both of you. As she turned off the light and closed the door, she heard Ethan whisper to Max, "You're the best dog ever. I'm so glad I found you." Max's tail thumped twice against the bedspread, a sound that had become the soundtrack of their new life together. A simple response that somehow said everything needed. In the quiet hallway, Sarah reflected on how a single act of kindness during a storm had rippled outward, bringing justice for a fallen officer, exposing corruption that had poisoned an entire community, and, most precious of all, bringing a loyal guardian into their lives just when they needed one most. Some might call it coincidence or luck. But as Sarah listened to the peaceful breathing of her son and his faithful companion, she knew it was something more. A reminder that even in the darkest storms, the smallest acts of compassion could light a path forward, not just for those being helped, but for the helpers too. Was your heart touched by this story of bravery and love? Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us what was your favorite part. Your support helps us bring more heartwarming stories like this one to you every week.